Welcome back to another edition of the Pagcast. I'm your host, Michael Pagani, joined alongside Blue Jackets insider Jeff Svoboda. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great as well. Thank you again for coming on. This does go a long way for me in my early sports journalism career.
Oh, well, I remember those days, and it was always nice to when people were willing to kind of help out when I was just getting into business, and that was hopefully it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was about 15 years ago for me. So yeah, I totally understand. It's good whenever anyone wants to talk about the Blue Jackets. I always love doing this kind of stuff because sometimes we don't get the publicity of other teams, so it's good to do that.
Now, with the Blue Jackets, they are going to the playoffs. Does your beard represent the traditional playoff beard?
I have had a beard since 2009, so this is not any different than normal. Although with the pandemic going on, it's a little longer than usual. I actually trimmed it up a little bit today. It was getting pretty out of hand, but I will keep it going whether we win or lose. But it's definitely longer right now than it's been probably ever.
And with the pandemic, a lot of people have turned towards Netflix to kind of settle in. They've watched Tiger King, Ozark, and Outer Banks are also, great TV shows. What have you been doing during quarantine?
Down here in Ohio, the golf courses are open. So that's been a thing that I've done quite a bit just because it's one of the few things you can do to get out of the house for about 4 or 5 hours and to get some fresh air and be outside and not have to really worry about the virus. So I've been doing a lot of that. And then as far as Netflix goes, I rewatched like the whole show run of Parks and Rec there for a while. And then I started Schitt's Creek, which is the great Canadian sitcom. And I'm about halfway through that, so that's one I've been watching as well. But I thought I was going to watch a lot more Netflix, and maybe I was for about a month or two, but it hasn't been as much as I kind of thought. And I've actually ended up watching a lot of old games when they're on the networks. With no sports, they've had to put something on. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so whether it be MLB Network, watching old baseball games, NHL Network, stuff like that, watching a lot of the Jackets games from this year, just to see anything I might have missed while they were happening. So I've been able to fill the time somehow, but I'm really looking forward to there actually being live sports and real hockey again, which it looks like we're trending that direction.
Now, let's get into your story a bit here. Who influenced you to get into sports journalism?
That's a good question because it's something I've always wanted to do, and I guess if I had to give you one answer, it would be ESPN. I just remember as a kid watching it as much as I could, and I remember I loved the Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann Sports Centers. Like that was like the height of my interest in sports. Was I just loved how smart and funny they were, even as like a 10-year-old. Which a lot of the jokes probably went over my head, but it was something that I just always wanted to do from that point forward. And I remember being a kid and kind of writing my own little sports newsletters and stuff. And, it was just something, it was the only thing I ever wanted to do in life. And so I was lucky enough that it kind of worked out for me. And because I know a lot of people who try to do this and were really good at it. And then for whatever reason, it didn't work out. They end up going other directions or whatever it may be. But, ever since I was a kid, it's what I've wanted to do. If I got fired tomorrow, I have absolutely no idea what I would do other than this, because this is pretty much the only thing I've ever wanted to do. So yeah, I'm lucky that it's kind of got me this far.
Well, I just want to mention that SportsCenter with the RE rather than the ER at the end is the better version.
Well, I do. It's funny when we are in Canada and travel up there, we do obviously get to see it.
Yeah.
And one thing that was kind of interesting to me, and we've seen, I think Jay and Dan.
They are the best.
Yeah, they ended up being down here for a while, and so I think Americans got exposed to them. But before I covered the Blue Jackets, I covered Ohio State, and we have a pretty good hockey program down here, but both men's and women's. And so the last trip that we were up in Canada, I would turn on the TV one night. Tessa Benham, who was a great Buckeye, was on, and then Natalie Spooner, who also played at Ohio State. Next night I flip on SportsCenter and she's on there, and it was like everywhere I go, there's Ohio State Buckeyes and people I knew from back in the day, and so it's kind of funny. To kind of see how they become stars up there with their play and then being kind of in the media as well. So that's one thing about this business too. It's a small world. And I remember, watching Tessa play when she was, a freshman and sophomore and at Ohio State. Now she's like a superstar up there in Canada. So you're getting some good ones from who at least have some ties to Ohio. I can tell you that.
Well, I just want to mention that, Tessa and both Natalie are, great, fantastic hockey players. Both are gold medalists against when they play against the USA. So, go Canada, go.
Well, it's always a great rivalry, isn't it? But, right now I think the U.S. has bragging rights after 2018.
Well, how can you say that after, they basically went to a shootout in the women's game? Like that doesn't even represent, getting a gold medal. You understand?
Oh, they've got gold medals. I can tell you that. You got to win it somehow. I
Oh yeah,
remember,
for sure.
yeah, and I was up. That was a late night game. I remember staying up until like 2:30 in the morning to watch the ending of that game. That was an absolute classic, and still won. After Canada got us in 20, was it 2010 or was it
2010 and 2014 back to back.
14 was the one where Canada scored the 2 late goals and then won it
Yeah,
overtime.
pull in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the U.S. owed them a little bit of payback on that one, but it's fun too. We've got Lisa Chesson, who was a silver medalist on that 2010 team, does a lot of stuff with the Blue Jackets, and she's a great person. I've got to know her a little bit over the last couple of years, and so like I say, it's a small world, and it's kind of fun, even on the women's side, to see kind of how the game has grown and just those great representatives of the sport. And there's my hometown in Ohio. Actually, another person who was on the 2010 silver medal team, Brianne McLaughlin, was a backup goalie for the U.S., and she grew up probably 10 minutes away from me. So it's kind of, even here in Ohio, we've got a lot of ties to the game. So it's pretty cool.
And then also Kendall Coyne Schofield, right? She was the first woman to do the speed skating at the, not speed skating, fastest skater at the All-Star game.
Yeah, and she's
that's crazy.
And she's become quite a big, I think, big influence and big inspiration for a lot of, young girls who want to get into hockey. And she's actually really good friends with the Blue Jackets skills coach, Kenny McCudden, was a coach of hers. They're both from Illinois, and they've worked together pretty much her entire life. So it was actually funny when she was in town, when the Jackets were down in Florida in December. We just played the Panthers, and then we left the next day. The Sharks came in that night because they were going to play the Panthers right after us. And so in the morning, I go down to the lobby and just to get some breakfast, and there's Kenny McCudden and Kendall Coyne Schofield sitting there, just sitting in the lobby having a great conversation. It's like, wait a minute, I think she looks familiar. And then so Kenny introduced me, so I got to meet her down in Florida on one of those trips because she was doing work with the Sharks at the time. So like I say, you never know who you're going to run into, and it's a small world. But I'm someone who's really enjoyed. I used to, with Ohio State being here and with the way college hockey is, some of the best women's players in the world come through, Ohio State and Minnesota Duluth, and that, so pretty much all the Olympians before they become Olympians, I've seen them playing down here at Ohio State, and so it's kind of cool just to see them up close and personal and see how good that hockey is, and it's great hockey. So, and it's gotten better quite a bit over the last probably 20 years, and so it's really come a long way, and it's fun to see those connections.
Like you mentioned, you kind of grew up with ESPN. That's how you got influenced. Would you be able to speak upon your road to where you are today? Like some of the successes, challenges?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest successes have always been, have kind of been triumphs of timing, I guess. And that's kind of pretty much any job you're going to get in life is pretty much always going to be that way. But, I took a very sort of traditional path for a sports journalist as far as to get where I am today. I'm from Ohio, went to Ohio State University and did journalism there, and was sports director of the student radio station and sports editor of the school newspaper, and just kind of got into it from there. And I guess I was decent at it. But on top of that, I met people who really, came to like me, and it just through being at so many events, I got to meet a lot of people, even when I was in college, and I ended up getting a job covering Ohio State right away, and did that for 9 years. My first year was covering the number one football team in the country, which was pretty crazy. And so did that for a while and stuck with it, and kind of rose from the bottom guy at where I was working to being the editor of the whole thing. And then moved to Toledo, Ohio, which is not a tremendously well-known place, but there's a pretty good newspaper there. I worked there for 3 years and became sports editor for my final year there. And then ended up getting hired by the Blue Jackets. And the two things that worked out the entire time as I was doing that was that there was the timing always worked out. That when I was looking to, when a job opened, I happened to be at a point where I was looking to do something different, or when I was looking to do something different, there happened to be the right job, and that's something that doesn't always happen. And then just the people, and I think that's, when people, I do get asked quite a bit, like, what are the two things or what would you say to people who are trying to get in the business, and how did you get into the business? And I would say, the two things I say are work your butt off, and then just know the right people. Because the more people you know and the more connections you make, the more likely you are maybe down the road for those connections to work out. And that's pretty much what's happened for me is, getting the job with the Blue Jackets. And it's a total blast, and I absolutely love it. And we can talk more about that however you want. But just as far as getting the job and being lucky enough to do it, I was at Toledo at the time, and there just happened to be the opening to be the Jackets insider, be the team reporter. And I just happened to have enough connections with people covering the team, and also people in the front office, just who I kind of met over the years and passing and stuff like that, that they kind of knew me and had a comfort level with me, and I was lucky enough to get the job. So that's kind of the path I followed. And, there's obviously positives and negatives and great things that happen. The first probably 7 or 8 years of my life, you're just scraping by and trying to make enough money to survive. But the cool thing too was, though, covering Ohio State, it wasn't like I had to go to some small town and cover high school sports or whatever, which would have been fun. But I was lucky enough that I was covering big time college athletics right out of school, and so I got to meet a lot of cool people, do a lot of cool things, and so a lot of things have worked out for me. I got really lucky, but at the end of the day, you still. I spent a lot of times in cold ice rinks on Saturday nights rather than being out with my friends and stuff like that. So you kind of have to work your butt off to make it happen as well.
So I'm getting my foot in the door in the sports journalism business by doing this podcast. Did you ever promote your own work while you were just starting out?
I guess you try to. It's different because the world when I first started out, I think, was a lot different than what it is now, and it's kind of crazy to think about. But when I go back to when I started in this business, which I was covering the Buckeyes when I was in school, which was basically 2003 to 2006, and got my first full-time job in 2006. When I started, Twitter didn't exist, and I very much remember going to a website. I think it was actually I was becoming a big soccer fan at the time, so it was like MLS Rumors. I would go to their website and kind of read some of the stories that they were writing about players and just kind of talk around the soccer league. And they had this thing on the right side of their website that said, like, Twitter, like, visit our Twitter page. And I remember clicking on it and thinking, well, this is stupid. Like, what's the point of Twitter? And then it kind of slowly grew and grew and grew. And now it's become, obviously, if you're a journalist and it's a way to promote your work and make contacts and stuff like that. And it's really, news breaks on Twitter now. And it's like everybody's customizable news source. And that didn't exist. The 24-hour cycle of news really just wasn't the same way, when I was starting out. And so, it was a different way to promote yourself. I mean, there wasn't really podcasts back then. I think that, there was radio shows and, I did student radio when I was in school, but like, there was no real podcast certainly the ease of taping them and distributing them wasn't the way that it was now. So it was a very different world, when I first got started. And so, it's kind of hard. I think it's actually better for young journalists though, too, is that if you have a unique voice and if you have, something about yourself that you do want to promote, and you're good at it, I think it's easier now to really catch eyeballs and really get people to look your direction. You really had to do it almost in obscurity for a long time back in the day. And I think that, like, the unique voices that kind of came out back when I was in school, and I remember Bill Simmons, when he started for ESPN and was a unique voice, he had probably written his stuff in Boston for a number of years before he got that break. But, how was he going to get that break until ESPN.com picked him up? But there was only one ESPN.com, and there was only really one guy that kind of became famous through doing that, and it was him. I mean, just the opportunities weren't what they used to be. So, I certainly encourage people to promote themselves and do it the best they can. Now you've got so many tools that I think the cream really rises to the top a lot more efficiently than it used to, because it's so much easier to get eyeballs and make a name for yourself, because it's just easier to be seen now than it was probably 15 years ago when I was starting out.
Now, what are some of the challenges that come with your job as a Columbus Blue Jackets insider?
There's the usual challenges. A lot of people ask me, what's it like working for a team, as opposed to working for a newspaper. I spent the first, probably, 12, 13 years of my career working for newspapers. And so it was now working for a team is the access a little bit different. Does the team, I get asked all the time, do they shut down stories you want to write, or do they have to approve things you have to write? And I have to say, the Blue Jackets have been really good to me as far as, they've really never been heavy-handed in what what I've written. I pretty much have the editorial freedom to write, what I'm doing. And they've been really great in that regard. So it hasn't really changed my job too much. Probably the second biggest question I get as far as challenges go is, like, what's it like covering John Tortorella? Because everyone wants to know what Torts is like. And I actually would say that, I'm going to miss him when he's gone. On a daily basis, there are times where he just doesn't want to talk, and that's just the way it's going to be. But I would say 95% of the time, he's great to the media. He, behind the scenes, he's a great guy. But when he's also in front of the microphones, he gives more detailed, unique, interesting, insightful answers than any coach I've ever been around. I covered Jim Tressel and was around him on a daily basis, and Urban Meyer, really high-profile college football coaches, and Torts, I think, in hockey kind of has that same reputation. But he's a dream. He's great. I mean, he'll tell you what he thinks. There are times where he gets mad and he's just not in the mood for it, and you just kind of can't take it personally and have to move on and go to the next day. But like I said, 95 and maybe even 99% of the time, he's great and he's fun to cover. And he just tells you the way it is, and he will give you. He fills up the notebook, that's for sure, and he's interesting. He tells you exactly actually what he's thinking and actually what's going on, rather than just kind of sitting behind cliches and stuff like that. And so that's been really fun as well. So the challenges are really not a ton. I mean, one thing that's great about working in hockey is that by and large, pretty much everyone you work with is really easy to work with, and the guys are great. You don't walk into the locker room and think, oh my God, I have to talk to this guy today. Everybody is generally really accommodating with their time and really good with their answers and stuff like that. And so that's why I say I'm lucky, is I've kind of fallen into this job here now where there's a lot of good things to say about it. And so I'm lucky that, working for a good organization and working in a great sport, there's certainly a lot more positives than there are negatives, and a lot more successes than there are challenges, I would say.
Well, when you are reporting on John Tortorella, well, I guess the media, you got to be aware of when Larry Brooks is in the scrum as well, because I know that he will say some questionable comments towards his coaching game.
But I also think that that's almost, and we don't see Brooks around a ton, but I think when we go back to New York, we still, he still will come and talk to Torts, and I think they have kind of patched that up a little bit. They were a little bit especially in the playoffs, Torts is just so tight-lipped, and so, when you keep digging at him in the playoffs, he just doesn't want to have it, and so that's probably when he goes a little, that's when those highlights that you see on YouTube tend to happen. But a lot of times Torts does that to take away focus. He puts the heat on himself to take away focus from his team. And there's a method to his. I don't want to say madness because it makes him sound like he's crazy, but you know what I mean. There's a method to what he's doing, I would say. And so, but the funny thing too is when we go back with Torts to, people talk about his Vancouver tenure as being kind of he was only there a year, and obviously he got himself into some trouble there. First of all, they didn't win, but also he created a lot of headlines. That was when he had the issue with Calgary and stuff like that. And I think that there's kind of this thought out there that he hated his time in Vancouver, and the people there didn't really get along with him. But, when he goes back to Vancouver, the Vancouver writers, he's so excited to see them. They're excited to see him. He's got a good relationship with them. When he goes to New York City, back to when we play Madison Square Garden where he coached for the Rangers, he's got so many contacts there that are happy to see him, and he's happy to see them. The rink guys and, the guys behind the scenes, he's got a lot of good relationships with kind of a lot of the common folk and a lot of the writers around the league. So as much as he has that reputation out there, he's probably a lot better guy than people might think he is. Although I don't know that he necessarily wants that out there either, just because I think he likes the reputation a little bit whenever it, sometimes it suits him. But by and large, he's a really fun guy to be around. I will say that.
How busy is your life with hockey?
Well, right now it's a little bit different than it's ever been. But when the season's going on, obviously it's incredibly busy, and that's kind of the normal thing. And I would say that 6 months from pretty much September into April, so I guess it's 7 months, and then if you go into playoffs, I mean, it's busy. And especially for someone like me who's lucky enough to travel with the team and go to all the road games, I mean, it's pretty much there's 6 months there where I'm living out of a suitcase. You come home, you do your laundry, and then you pack right up and go back on the road again. And so it's busy, but it's fun, certainly. And I think if you get into this business, you don't get into sports writing or sports media to do it for 40 hours a week. That's just not really the way it works out. If you want to work 40 hours a week, you can get an office job, and that's it. But like if all the jobs I've ever had, I've worked 50, to 60 to 70 hours a week when the season's going on. And then off seasons are always obviously a little bit better. And especially here in hockey, the off season, especially once you get through the draft and free agency, July and August are pretty chill. In a normal year, obviously now it's a little bit different this year. But when you're in the season, it's busy and you're working your butt off. But that's kind of if you enjoy it though, it's really not that bad. But the fun thing too is with the travel, you become really a part of the group, and with us and the support staff that goes, and it's tough sometimes being on the road all the time, but you're there with friends and you're there with people who you really enjoy being around, and they sort of become a second family, and you see them really more than your family. And so for as busy as it is, it's what I like to do, and it's something I'm suited for, and I enjoy it. And working 60 hours a week really doesn't bother me because you still find time. You're doing it with people you like, and so I think that's the main thing. Is that when I go to the rink, as much as I'm there with people I enjoy being around, and it doesn't feel like work all the time. And so, those 14-hour days, you got a morning skate and you're at the rink at 10 a.m. and you don't leave till the game is over at 11. So, 13, 14, 15-hour day of a game day. I'm there with good people, and I really enjoy it. I'm getting to watch hockey, so what's better than that?
How do you keep busy during the off season then?
Like I say, golf. The interesting part is, and I've kind of gotten used to this too, is, no matter what sport you cover, and when I was covering Ohio State, you have the football season, then you go off and you've got summer. Here it's the same way, you've got summer. You find things to do during the off season. It's a little bit different. Obviously, it's not as crazy as the regular season is. But we've got, obviously in the NHL, you play until April, and then you might play into May or June, and then June you're preparing for the draft, and then you've got development camp right after that with us, and then you got free agency right after that. And so those first couple months when the season ends, you're able to, you're still pretty busy. It's not the constant everyday busyness, but there's still plenty of things to talk about. You can look back at how the season went. You can look ahead to the draft. You can look ahead to free agency and stuff like that. And then you just kind of have to find a couple ways to stay busy in the summer months. And certainly there's vacation to be had there as well. And everybody's always really good about that. You see Bob, we're all like Bob McKenzie. We all become Bobby Margarita there for a couple weeks when the summer happens. But then, you still find a couple things. You got time then to do, a couple maybe more in-depth things you want to have time to do the rest of the year. And you kind of stay in touch with guys and write about that. And then before you know it, you look up and it's September and we're getting started again. So in a league like this, there's usually always something to write about, and you can figure out ways to keep yourself busy even when there's not much going on. And then, our time in the office, the team's really good. They don't really make me work, 9 to 5 every day in the summer. It's come in, get your work done, and go home and call it a day and enjoy the time. So I'm lucky in that regard as well. So you figure out things to do is what I would kind of say. Is the more you do it, and the older you get.
What's a typical game day for you at home?
I was just kind of talking about it there, but especially, what's funny is that 2 years ago, it felt like Torts got rid of morning skates, and so we didn't necessarily have to be there in the morning. But now they've kind of come back, and I think the players actually just sort of liked it. And I think that was it kind of helped them get into a routine of what they're used to on a daily basis. And so a game day, the Jackets morning skate was always at 10:30 if it's a home game. And I'll give you the home game day because that one's a little more normal than the road because, there's so many more variables on the road. But so if it's a home game day, I usually get to the rink around 10 and go straight down to the press conference area in Nationwide Arena where the Blue Jackets have that. And so Torts will usually talk at 10:30. He'll give kind of his daily update, who's in the lineup, goalie, that kind of stuff. And you can, basically ask him whatever you want at that point. And then as soon as when he's done, go out and kind of the morning skate's going on, so you can kind of see who's out there and see what they're up to. And that usually takes about half an hour to 45 minutes. And so we do that and then go to the locker room for interviews. So we're in the room, before the morning of the game, and it's not a time to sit down with a guy for 15 minutes and do a long-winded feature story, but whoever you need to talk to is usually available then. So you kind of get some more interviews done. By that time, it's about 11:45 or so, and so the opposing team will be out there. So if there's someone from the opposing team, maybe a free agent that's come back that had played for the Jackets, or someone who's from the area or whatever, you can talk to them, or you can watch the opposing team. Certainly when Sergei Bobrovsky came back, all the us Columbus guys were watching the Panthers morning skate that day because it was his first game back, and then we tried to talk to him, although he didn't want to talk till after the game rather than be distracted before the game. But, so you kind of you go from there, and then when all that's done, I kind of go back up. Our offices are actually in the arena in Nationwide. So I go back to the office. If there's anything I need to write based off of what happened in the morning, I'll go ahead and get that done. And then I'll probably go to lunch somewhere in there. And then it's, by then it's around 2 o'clock or so. And then probably, you've got a couple hours there to do whatever, so it's, transcribe, get some work done, work ahead, work on a story for the next day, stuff like that. It's a good time to kind of see your coworkers because they're there too, so you can kind of socialize a little bit and see everybody. And then 5 o'clock we go down. We have we get dinner 5:30. Usually done with that around 5:30, 5:45, and then kind of from there it's doors open at 6. And I'm a guy, I like to be down in the arena bowl when the pregame warm-ups happen, just because. You never know what you're going to find down there, whether it be fans or whether it be players on the ice and stuff like that. So that time is there's some socializing time in there to kind of see people around the rink, which is always one thing I love about this job is the people. So there's always people around the rink that you can run into and talk to and stuff like that, and fellow media members you can talk to pregame and things like that. But I love being down there, the energy of pregame warmups and kind of, trying to get photos of the fans and whatever fun fans you see and putting that out on social media. Trying to get pictures of the players during warmups, anything cool like that. Every once in a while I'll go out to the bench and try to get some cool photos from there. Like if you got someone doing their first game, like a rookie making his debut, he's going to do the rookie lap.
That's always fun.
Yeah, so it's like I want to be on the bench and try to get video of the rookie lap that I can put on Twitter because fans love that kind of stuff. And so just always looking for unique things as, pregame to kind of bring the experience of the game for fans who aren't there. What can I put on social media so fans can kind of feel what it's like to be at the arena even if they're not there. And then once the game starts, you're covering it. I'm tweeting during a game. I have the ability to clip some live highlights from our scoreboard. So if something funny happens on the scoreboard, I can go in and clip something really quick and put that on social media. And then I'm writing a game story as the game goes on as well. So it's busy, and I have to have that story done the second the game is over, and before we go down for interviews. And so pretty much, I'm writing basically second intermission. I write the story and then just kind of add to it as the third period goes on. And then as soon as that game's over, I put the story up. I go down for post-game interviews. We do players first and then torts. And then I go back up to my office at that point. It's probably about 10 o'clock in the evening, and I type out what the guys had to say, put that in the story as necessary, and usually by then it's about 11 o'clock and it's time to go home. So that's a pretty detailed answer as far as what a game day is, but that's pretty, like I say, it's busy, but it's the entire time I'm there. I'm around people I know and people I like and my friends, and it's a good time. And as much as the work is you're always kind of, especially from 6 o'clock until 11 o'clock, you're tuned in and you're wired and you're on. That on switch is flipped. It's fun and it's exciting, and it's almost like your own little. While the players are playing their game, you're playing your game to get that story done and get everything out there as quickly as possible and do it in the best way you can. And that's kind of a thrill for me to get to do that all the time. So it's a busy day, but then you go home and go to bed and come back and do it again the next day.
Speaking on the Blue Jackets season this year, it was quite phenomenal because in preseason, the rankings had the Jackets near the bottom of the league after they lost Panarin, Duchesne, and Bobrovsky, the three big players to their core at the trade deadline last year. How big has the emergence of Elvis, Merzlikins, and Joonas Korpisalo been?
Oh, it's been huge, and it's been the key to the season. And I think, frankly, before the season, I thought this team was going to be better than what people had what the experts had kind of said. And of course I thought that. I covered the Blue Jackets and I worked for the team. But at the end of the day, I think people were sort of overlooking, this was still a team that had, the Zach Werenskis and Seth Joneses and, Cam Atkinsons and Pierre-Luc Dubois and Oliver Bjorkstrand. And, there was a lot of talent in the skater group of this team. And even if as banged up as they were, I think this is still a pretty good, talented team. But if they didn't have the goaltending, they weren't going to go anywhere. And losing Bob, who had been, the brick wall for 7 years and had been, they really built this team around Sergei Bobrovsky for 7 years. And for him to go, the pressure was there. It was going to, the question of the season was, were they going to get good enough goaltending to be a playoff contender? And then pretty much, the first month of the season, it was a little bit up and down. And then Joonas Korpisalo really kind of caught fire, and he was great. And I think, the Blue Jackets always knew he had that in him, but to see him do it consistently for a 20-game stretch was something that he proved a lot to them in that time. And then he gets hurt, and then Elvis steps in, and it was basically a revelation. So much fun to watch, so much personality, so much athleticism and skill in his game. And he caught fire and had that great month of January where he was probably even better than Korpisalo had been for that time. And so, they've now got two good goalies that they feel pretty good about. So it'll be really interesting to see which one they end up kind of turning to here in this as they get restarted and play the Maple Leafs. That's going to be kind of the million-dollar question around this team. I think they've got two good answers, so I don't think there's a wrong answer. But, if one guy goes out and struggles in the first game, you're really behind the eight ball. So you got to get that one right from the beginning. But, this whole season was built around, are these goalies good enough? And the team thought they were good enough, but they'd never proven it. And then they went out this year and proved it. And they're both great guys, and they're both easy guys to root for, too. So from the insider perspective, it's been kind of fun to see them both have the success that they had because, you knew they had it in them, and you knew they were great guys, and you wanted them to be able to do it. And then when they actually did it, it was really neat to be around, I would say.
How big is going to be Cam Atkinson? He's returning from injury. He has former 70 points. How big is that return?
Yeah, especially, he was really starting to play really well in December, and then he got hurt. and missed a month, and then came back and wasn't the same player, and then missed another month. You look at a guy who scored 41 goals last year and has pretty much always in his career consistently gotten better as the years have gone on, and has become, I mean, he's really moving up there in the ranks as far as the Blue Jackets all-time leading scorers. And he's a guy that I could very well threaten Rick Nash's marks down the road. So yeah, he's as important a player as the Blue Jackets have, and to get him back and have him healthy would be huge. And there's no doubt about it, because he's one of those guys. 41 goals a year ago. This team didn't score a ton of goals this year. I think they've got it in them to do better. They've got Zach Werenski, one of the top scoring defensemen in the league. Seth Jones can score from the blue line. I think Oliver Bjorkstrand was coming one of the most underrated players in the league. Pierre-Luc Dubois is kind of growing his game, but you need Cam Atkinson to score for this team to be as good as it's going to be. And I'll be very interested to see how he plays. But if the time off, if he's fully healthy, I think that'll help him out a lot, because he just wasn't the same player after he it's an ankle sprain, and the way he kind of to be cutting and digging your skates in the ice, and the way he has to play. I think he's got to be healthy as far as that goes to be at his best, and hopefully he'll be there for the Jackets going forward.
The Jackets were heavily depleted this year, suffering injury after injury. How did they keep winning?
I think you talk about Torts. I think Torts really instilled in this team a mindset of don't worry about the guys who are not there, just focus on the players who are there. And yeah, it was tough, and I think at the end of the day, it did catch up with them. Once Seth Jones and Oliver Bjorkstrand got hurt in back-to-back games, and both basically broke their leg in exactly the same way. They weren't the same team. I think they only won 3 of their last 14 games, and they were in all those games, but they just didn't have the difference makers. 5 of those losses were in overtime, and it's like, God, if you just had Oliver Bjorkstrand out there in 3-on-3, if you just had Seth Jones out there in 3-on-3, they probably would have won a couple more of those games and been in a better playoff position. But they just didn't have the game breakers coming down the stretch there, and Atkinson was hurt as well. They missed Josh Anderson the whole year. So it did catch up with them in the end, but really this team sort of almost used the injuries to come together. December was really when they started to get banged up, but it's also when they started playing their best hockey. And they had some players who kind of came up from the minor leagues and just put it all on the line and just played in the team concept and just said, we're going to go out there and bust our butts and play our butts off. And that was the team concept that this team kind of needed. And that's kind of when the team kind of meshed. And then as guys got healthy and came back in there, they've kind of just kept playing in that way. So it's weird that the injuries almost helped them in a way become the team that they became. And then just with Torts, saying, don't focus on the injuries, just go forward, play your game. You can't change anything, just focus on what you have, and that's all you got. He did a great job with that, and the team really bought in, and I think he almost became better through it until there were just so many that it was almost impossible for them to get better. But in a weird way, it actually sort of bonded them and made them a team that, and all the players I've talked to throughout this coronavirus pause, and I did weekly interviews with guys just to kind of get some content out there. They all talked about, this team was closer than almost any other team that they've ever been on. And you could just tell in the way that they played, they were all on the same page and they all battled their butts off. And, they were hard to play against, and, there was no egos. And that doesn't always happen with teams. And so it was kind of weird that I think the injuries sort of made that happen and actually made them a better team in a weird way.
Now, the Columbus Blue Jackets of last year in the playoffs, 2018-19, it forced the NHL to make a second bracket challenge because of how many people picked Tampa Bay to win the Cup. Take me through the night of the sweep when it happened. How long were you partying? Were you partying with anyone?
In fact, it was a great night. And well, the funny thing I will say is about this whole series is that, even when the Blue Jackets are up 3-0, like you're as someone who, has grown up in Ohio as a Blue Jackets fan and a Blue Jackets team employee, I was still terrified that they were going to lose that series because you think about, okay, if you lose game, you have to win game 4 almost, because if you lose game 4, you go back to Tampa, that's going to be a hard one. You lose game 5, you come home for game 6, you're like, oh my God, we have to win game 6 because we can't go back to Tampa for game 7. It's like you could easily see how that series could have sort of like slipped away. And so as they were protecting, it's a 4-3 game going to the third period. They're protecting that lead. And the whole building is nervous, and the whole building is just like, oh my God, is this going to happen? And then when it finally happens, the outpouring of joy that, the Blue Jackets fan base had been waiting for 20 years all comes out. And in fact, someone in the stands threw like a thing of popcorn up in the air, and it came down on Media Row and completely covered my laptop. Like I had popcorn just everywhere. on my laptop. And so that was one of the things I'll always kind of remember. It was just like people were so excited. They're throwing drinks in the air, they're throwing popcorn. It was just so crazy. And then, post game, pretty much everyone for the organization went out, and I will say pretty much we had a good time. There was no one was going to act like you've been there before, because no one had ever been there before. So, yeah, it was fun to as you were going out around the arena from place to place, you were seeing team employees and people who'd been around and fans and stuff like that. It was definitely a late night, I will say that.
It must feel good for a longtime Columbus Blue Jacket player, Nick Foligno, to finally get to the second round.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about this team, too, is how they've kind of built it slowly through the years. And Nick's been a part of that, and even guys like David Savard and Cam Atkinson. But if you go back, I mean, the guts of this team, I think 36 guys played for the Blue Jackets this year, and they drafted 22 of them, which just goes – and most of the big names on this team were guys that they drafted and developed, or guys like Seth Jones or Nick, who they traded for, and this years ago. These are not new free agent acquisitions that have made this team good. It's guys who've been around for a while and kind of have been in the community and know how much it means to the community. And they built this team from where 5 years ago this team stunk. Let's just say it. They weren't a good hockey team. But they kind of built, and they added pieces as the years went on. They added Torts a couple years ago. And they had a couple of those first round game places where they were close to winning a series, but that Washington series where they're up 2-0, they kept getting closer and closer, and then it finally happened. And I think for the people who'd been around for a long time, who'd kind of seen it grow, it really meant a lot. And certainly the Nick Folignos of the world are a part of it. And, he tells a great story about he came home from practice one day, or maybe from game 4 or something like that. He comes home, and his neighbors had just surrounded his garage door with brooms that they had found for the sweep that they put there just to show how excited they were. And it's just funny how, so many of these guys are so important in the community, and they have these relationships because they've been here for so long. It means a heck of a lot to them. And to see them build this team into a winner, it's been kind of cool because it has come from within. And with good guys who put in the time and put in the effort and put in the, know what it means now to kind of be a Blue Jacket.
In your opinion, going into the second round against the Bruins, did you get a sense that Columbus in the city had a swagger to its name?
It kind of did, yeah, actually. I mean, for the first time that you'd maybe seen in Blue Jackets history, frankly, because, you can't really have a swagger if you've never won before. But I think that team developed that from the middle of that first Tampa game, and the way that they came back and won that game, and then the way they played the rest of that Tampa series. They played that series with swagger. I mean, they played like they were the better team. And Tampa Bay kind of melted down around it. It was really kind of crazy to see. The Blue Jackets, were in command of all those games and just felt like they were the better team. And they just let Tampa kind of fall apart around them. And so going into the Boston series, yeah, I think they felt that way. But certainly, Boston is a team that has a lot of swagger too and a lot of experience. And people, look back and kind of forget that ended up being a really good series. I mean, Columbus-Boston was about as even as they come. And Boston ends up winning it, but Columbus could have won that series, and who knows what would happen then, facing Carolina. But there was a time there where they really started to believe, and I think it speaks to maybe that question that you just asked me about kind of the guys that have been here for a long time. They've built a winning culture here, and even this year, part of how they survived all the injuries was that winning culture. And I think going forward, it's a really good time to be a Blue Jackets fan because. Now that they have that culture, I think it's going to sustain for a while, and they've got a lot of good young players. Most of the best players on this team are 25 years old or younger. And if it just keeps building, it'll be really interesting and really exciting to see what can happen here over the next couple of years.
Do you think that the reason Columbus lost to Boston in 4 games was because they had too much time off?
It certainly didn't help. And I remember the first game of that Boston series, game 1, I mean, Boston was skating circles around the Blue Jackets for probably the first 25 minutes. And, you could just tell the Jackets were a little bit rusty. They hadn't played a game in 10 days. So, that didn't help. But, at the end of the day, did that matter over a 6-game series? Probably not. It was a factor in game 1, and Boston won that game, but it was in overtime. So I would say, the Jackets still had a chance to win that game. So I think Boston's experience probably played a pretty big factor. And I think Boston ended up having a little bit better goaltending. And then the Blue Jackets got banged up too. I mean, Josh Anderson got hurt in that series. Riley Nash got hurt in that series. They were already down, they were down to their 7th, 8th, and 9th defensemen going into that because of injuries with, guys being out. And so it just kind of became a war of attrition, and Boston had a little bit more experience, a little bit more goaltending. as I look back, I'd say those were the bigger factors, but it did play into it a little bit at the start. I would say that, yeah.
How are you liking how Gary Bettman has handled the return to play format, or do you think there are changes that could have been made?
I think he's handled it about as well as possible. I mean, my only complaint, it would be a small one, is that they probably could have moved things a little quicker once they made the decision in late May that how things were going to go and what the team you're going to go 24 teams and things like that. They pretty much the entire month of June was pretty much spent doing these kind of informal on and off ice workouts, and I think they could have maybe moved things a little quicker. But it's hard because you've got players who have gone out internationally, and a lot of players went. The European players went home, Russian players went home. Everyone kind of scattered, so you had to get everybody back and things like that. So I sort of get it, but it would have been nice if things had moved a little quicker, just because we're going to get into July and August here, and then we're going to probably have like every sport happening. And maybe the NHL could have got out there a little ahead of things if they moved a little quicker, but through it by and large, I think they've been pretty responsible. I mean, they had to shut things down when they did. They had to be you couldn't rush back. There was no doubt about that. Once they made the decision, I think when they made the decision in May, they came up with a really good format to do it. A very fair format to, anyone who had a chance at a playoff spot is in the play, now is kind of in this return to play format, which I think is pretty fair. And I think that, they've really put a lot of time and effort into making sure that these guys stay healthy. It's going to be really difficult. And we've seen, MLS has already had some issues with their bubble. NBA has had some, players in their home facilities, get sick before they've even gotten to their bubble. So it's, it's tough because you can't control the virus, but I think they've taken all the precautions that they can. And we'll just kind of have to see where it goes from here.
Nick Foligno did come out recently and clarify comments that players, wouldn't tank for the number 1 overall pick, which is just absurd that people would think that. How big would Lafreniere be for the Jackets organization if the Jackets won, or, if the Jackets win the lottery or the number 1 overall pick?
He would be huge, because I think if you look at the way the Blue Jackets are constructed, the one piece that they're maybe missing is you look at, could this team win a Stanley Cup in the next 4 to 5 years? The one thing that they probably could use is a superstar winger. And I mean, who couldn't use a superstar winger? Yeah. Right. But if you look at over the last probably 15 years, I mean, Ovechkin's won a cup. Sidney Crosby has won, 3 cups, and with Malkin with him. The Taves and Kane group in Chicago won multiple cups. Boston's won. The teams that tend to win the cup have those 1 or 2 really difference makers who can make something out of nothing, especially offensively, to score goals, because it's hard to score goals in the playoffs. And you almost need kind of those guys who, and even St. Louis was sort of known for its bruising way that it, bruising big defensemen, kind of physical play, but they still had Ryan O'Reilly and Vladimir Tarasenko on that team, who are really, really darn good players. You could even say are game breakers. And I think, you need 1 or 2 of those guys to really, really have legitimate chances to win the Stanley Cup. And I think Oliver Bjorkstrand is kind of getting there for the Blue Jackets. He had a really great under-the-radar year. He's only 24, I think, or 25 years old, and I think he's going to be, this is going to be a 30, 40 goal scorer over the next couple of years. I think Pierre-Luc Dubois is getting there, but is he going to be a 25 goal scorer or a 40 goal scorer? I think the jury might be out on that. I think he could be 30, but is he ever going to be 40? He's kind of settled right in the mid-20s right now, but he's also only 21 years old. But if you added a guy like Lafreniere to that whole thing, you'd be like, oh my goodness. Like, then you'd feel, okay, you've got that game-breaking winger who's a legit number 1 overall pick, superstar stud. Because it's hard to get those guys. You either draft them or you sign them in free agency. But how often does that happen in free agency? I mean, we've never seen Ovechkin move. We've never seen Crosby move. Austin Matthews doesn't look like he's going anywhere. McDavid doesn't look like he's going anywhere. You pretty much have to draft those guys. And so, yeah, I mean, the Blue Jackets would absolutely love to have that. And they're not going to tank, obviously, but if they lose that series and they're in the running, that would be a heck of a consolation prize if they're able to get Lafreniere.
Did you watch the draft lottery?
I did, yes. And boy, you got about 4 picks into it and you thought, oh no, you can see how this was trending, just because it was like, people were it was just the confusion of the whole thing. Oh yeah. As far as it just felt like the most NHL possible thing to have happen was to have a team win the draft lottery who's not even in the draft lottery. But at the end, it's also fair, I think, the way that they did it. It just kind of felt weird, sort of for people who were following it casually. It was maybe a little bit confusing and a little bit dissatisfying, but for it worked out the way it worked out, and it'll be very, very interesting to see how this is going to go. And I just feel bad for all the Red Wings fans out there because, boy, they took a tumble.
Speaking of prospects, what are some prospects in the Blue Jackets organization that fans should be excited about?
Well, we're going to probably see one here in this upcoming qualifying series against Toronto, and Liam Foudy, who was the number 1 pick for the team back in 2018, 18th overall, played for the London Knights, the past couple of years, and really had become one of the elite players in the OHL this season, was on Canada's World Junior Championship gold medal team, and came up and played a couple games for the Jackets in February and did not look out of place at all. He's in this camp, and he could play for the team, and I think he's pretty much assured of being on the opening night roster a year from now. And so, he's a guy that they're going to see immediately. Down the road, Kirill Marchenko over in Russia, he signed 2 more years over to play for the St. Petersburg team over there. But he's another guy that was in the World Juniors and is playing really, really well in the KHL this year. When he comes over in a couple years, could be one of those top 6 forward kind of guys that really stands out. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to bring down the road. And I'm kind of excited too to see that they just signed Jake Christensen on the WHL, who was one of the top free agents who was available. And he could be a guy defensively. I think the defensive pipeline for the Jackets is a little thin. He really adds to that and could be the next guy you see coming up and playing big minutes on the blue line for the Blue Jackets. So, and they've got a really good goalie pipeline as well. We saw Matisse Kivlenieks come up and play a few games this year. Vaini Vevalainen played in Cleveland this year and had a really good year. And so they've got a good number of guys coming down the pipe in the goaltending realm as well. So, I don't think they have the deepest farm system, but they've got some guys who in the next 2 to 3 years are really going to start to contribute. And they don't need a bunch of guys to do that because they've pretty much locked up this core for the next couple of years. But, as you start adding a couple more pieces, I think they've got some good ones that are coming down the road.
With a wacky lottery system came a wacky playoff system. How do you like the 2014 playoffs?
I think it works out fine. I think it's the best they could do. You had to do more than 16. It just wasn't going to be fair because you had teams who had, thought they were going to have 12 to 15 more games to make the playoffs. And then when they, the pause happened when it happened, and to not give the teams a chance to be in it, who were right on that borderline, I don't think that would have been fair for anybody. And Columbus is in that group as well. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think it was fair to go to 24. I mean, maybe did just do Chicago and Montreal. I mean, those were teams who I think had pretty much given up the ghost as to being playoff teams, but now they're in it. Is that fair? But give them a chance, I guess. It's better to have, I think, more teams and settle it on the ice than to have less teams and have people griping. So I think they did it as fairly as they could, and I think it's going to be fun. I can't wait to watch it. So at the end of the day, I think they did the best they could. I think they came up with the most fair system that they could, and now we'll see what happens.
Do you think the NHL should carry this format out, with the lottery being the same and the playoffs being expanded? Do you think they should carry it out in, future seasons?
I wouldn't say for future seasons just because, 16 is pretty good. I think it's good having half your teams in the playoffs. I think that's a good number. It just, the way that this is obviously a unique, once in a lifetime thing that's happened here. We kind of had to make the best of the hand we were dealt and go forward. But I would say, I don't think there's any real reason to expand to 24. That's just so many teams at that point. I think 16 is the right number. But it is tough because you do lose. If you look around the league, there's really only about 6 or 7 teams you look at and you say, that's just not really a really good hockey team. And that kind of sounds mean, and you can still lose those teams on a if you don't have your best night. But every year now there are probably, I would say 7 to 8 teams that get left out. Those 17 to 24 kind of teams, you look at the rosters and think that's a hard team to beat right there. So you could sell me a little bit on maybe more teams deserve to be in it, but at the end of the day you got to cut off somewhere, and I think 16 is a pretty good number in the full season because you have your chances at that point.
Now, like you mentioned, the Jackets are up against the Leafs, and as a Habs fan myself, I love watching the Leafs fail. What's your outlook for the series?
It's going to be super interesting, and it's the ultimate clash of styles, as they say, because the Blue Jackets, won games this year because of how good they were defensively. The Maple Leafs win games because of how good they are offensively, and so whichever team, dictates the pace of the game is going to be the team that's going to win. And who's it going to be? Who knows? I think, in the playoffs, defensive teams usually fare better, which I think favors the Blue Jackets. But I also think that with these teams taking so much time off, you always see when the league comes back in the beginning of the season, scoring is up, and then as teams really buckle down for the playoffs, scoring goes down as the year goes on. So, maybe that's something to the fact that, when hockey starts again, will offensive teams have an advantage because that's the way it is in October and November of most seasons. So maybe that gives Toronto the advantage. Who knows? But it's going to be whichever team gets to their game the fastest. And which team will that be? I have absolutely no idea. It's going to be that's what the whole thing's going to be about. Whichever team can play its style. And I wouldn't surprise me for this to be a 5-game series just because they're so close. I mean, they both ended up with 81 points in 70 games. They both play the game so differently. It's a really interesting matchup.
Have you been watching how the Leafs play during this coronavirus pandemic?
What's that?
Have you been watching highlights of how the Leafs play during this coronavirus pandemic?
Not a ton, but I think people kind of know what this Leafs team is all about. I mean, I think certainly the people with the team. I talked to Brad Shaw, one of our assistant coaches, for a Q&A a little bit ago, and he kind of runs the defense for the Jackets, and he's breaking down power plays and breaking down how they try to score and things like that. People in the organization certainly are who are on hockey ops, but for me, we know what Toronto's all about. We know it's they're trying to score goals. It's Austin Matthews and John Tavares and Mitch Marner and William Nylander, and they're trying to win. They're trying to score 3 or 4 goals and win every game because that's what their strength is. That's what they're made of. So for the Blue Jackets, it's going to be not allowing that time and space, and it's going to be you've got to be on your game for 60 minutes. You can't take a ton of penalties. Your penalty kill, which has been a strength for the team most of the year, has to be on its game. You can't start chasing the puck or they're going to put it in the back of the net. That's as simple as it is. So, I think everyone knows what this is all about. And like I say, it's a great matchup.
Now, on March 18th, CTV News, the reporters had to be innovative as they had to use hockey sticks attached to microphones to demonstrate physical distancing. Do you see that as a potential route for the media to go in the near future?
I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that goes because, we're not – who knows when this pandemic's going to end. And, I think even until vaccines comes out, we're all going to be in kind of different worlds. And so, will we have to do something like that? It might be. When we came back right before the pause hit and we were doing interviews of players, we had to keep 6 feet away for one of the interview sessions. And they put they put a player at a table and they put tape around and you couldn't get any closer than that. And we were all kind of like, well, this seems a little bit weird. And, we didn't really know what was coming, obviously. So, is there going to be a 6-foot barrier going forward? When are we going to be allowed back in the locker room? When's the next time you've all seen scrum workers with Jay and Dan. But if, we all know what the scrums are like in the NHL locker rooms. Are we going to see those anytime in the near future? Who knows what it's going to be like? So, if I got to take one of my hockey sticks and tape a mic to it, maybe I will. But I hope to keep them so I can just keep playing hockey with them, ideally.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Jay and Dan, their skit of scrum lurkers will have to come to an end until the near future, until all this gets resolved.
Yeah, and I was a scrum worker. I got caught in Montreal last year when we were after a practice. Torts was talking, and I was on the outside of it, and I got the scrum worker treatment on Jay and Dan. So you can go back and find that one.
Do you take pride in that?
Maybe. Not pride. I'd like to be the scrum question asker rather than the worker. But, you have to take it in good spirit and good fun. And it happens every once in a while where you get yourself in a bad spot and you look at the camera and you go, oh, no. Like this happened to me when we were one of the last games we played was in Edmonton. And Gus Nyquist was talking after the game. And I was trying to get to a spot to get in there for the interview. And I kind of came around the back of him to get my spot and get my mic in there. And I look up and I'm looking straight into the Fox Sports Ohio camera. And I'm like, I am live on the postgame show right now. And I am just as much in this shot as Gus Nyquist. I was just like, oh no. And you can even, I went back and found the video and you can even see like the exact moment where I look up and see the camera and you can sort of see my face go, oh, this is not where I want to be. But it happens. You just got to take it and run with it because it's just the way it's going to be.
Now, final question here on the Pagcast. Do you have any advice for aspiring sports journalists?
Like I said, work hard. There's a real battle out there as to whether you should do things for free or not, and that's hard for me to answer. I don't think that it's great, that there's, there are certainly big websites out there that will kind of exploit you for your labor, and I don't think that that's, great business practices. But I will say, the more work you can do and the more work you can get published, develop a unique voice, write what you want to write, be you, and get it out there. However you can get it out there, because you're only going to get better by doing it. You're only going to develop followers and make a name for yourself, and by doing it and meeting people and catching an eye or things like that. So like I said, this business is about timing, and it's honestly about who you know. I don't want it to sound like people get jobs that they don't deserve, but anytime you're trying to make it in the media business and you're applying for a job, there's probably going to be 100 people applying for that job. And so it just does help to have contacts and have people that know your work and know how good your work is and can vouch for you when those times come along. So you've got to do good work, but you've also got to know people, and you've got to develop contacts, and not in a self-serving way where it's like, oh, I just want to develop this contact for the sake of developing contact. But I think over the years, when you're around people, you develop relationships and you develop friendships, and those are the things that help you out a lot. So just stick with it and keep doing it. Like I say, try to get your work out there as much as possible. Try to get better. Read other people. Decide for you what you think is good and what you think isn't. And just go from there and develop your voice and try to meet people and try to hope people like your work and go from there.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Columbus Blue Jackets insider Jeff Svoboda for joining me today. Thank you again, Jeff.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, man.